welcome my homestead and welcome to my channel. Looks like we have some breaking news coming out of Israel that has to do with the government and the government being dissolved. And this is something that we've been looking at for a while now. We've visited this topic a number of times, talking about Naftali Bennett and his coalition of all these different political parties, including an Arab party, coming together in order to oust Benjamin Netanyahu, and it succeeded. And what was supposed to happen was, for the first half of the term, I guess, Naftali Bennett right here on the right, he was supposed to be prime minister, and then the second half, it was going to be Yair Lapid. And I'm just going to read you some of the details about what's going on. We were looking at it around the time of Passover, because that's when it seems like the initial cracks in the government started to kind of show. There was this one girl that was part of the coalition that she dropped out because it had to do with hospitals serving leavened bread during Passover, and she wasn't happy about that because she is like she's conservative and on the side of religion, so she was unhappy about the government not doing anything about that, and she dropped out. Everything that was going on at the Temple Mount, there was a lot of like conflict there, and the Arab, what are they called? I think they're called the Ram Party, R-A-A-M, Ram Party. They like kind of symbolically step back. Well, there's been more that's happened since then, and now it's finally happened. It's getting dissolved. So first we're looking at CNN. Israel set for possible fifth election in 4 years as Prime Minister Bennett moves to dissolve Parliament. All right, so I have a few different sites that we're going to be looking at. So it says here, along with his key coalition ally, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, again, it's this guy right here. He's currently acting as the foreign minister, who now looks to set. Okay. Along with his key coalition ally, Foreign Minister Yair Lapid, who now looks set to replace him as leader as early as next week, Bennett has agreed to submit a bill to dissolve Parliament, which, if passed, would trigger a general election later this year. Okay, so already he is going to be stepping down. The rest of the time that they have power, he's going to pass it over to Lapid right here. Who is Lapid? Well, I didn't find anything too significant or noteworthy to share, but he's it says here he's a centrist. Okay, on the political spectrum, he's in the center. The centrist Yesh Atid party, which he founded, Lapid founded it, became the second largest party in the Knesset by winning 19 seats in its first legislative election in 2013. The greater than anticipated results contributed to Lapid's reputation as a leading centrist. And I kind of looked through here. This is just the Wikipedia article. I wanted to see if there was any controversy or anything like that. He's rubbed a few people the wrong way, like religious Jews, Orthodox Jews, a little bit. Not really bad, but I mean, I can't say for sure, but from what I could tell, just a little bit of friction. So, okay. Made up of no fewer than 8 political parties. Can you imagine that? 8 political parties to put this government together. The coalition stretched right across the political spectrum, including for the first time, an Arab party led by Mansour Abbas. United in a desire to prevent Netanyahu, whose corruption trial had already begun in May 2020, from remaining in power, the desperate coalition partners agreed to put their substantial differences to one side. The political impasse came to a head earlier this month when a Knesset vote failed to uphold the application of Israeli criminal and civil law to Israelis in the occupied West Bank. So I'm not going to be able to explain this very well, but with the 6-Day War, when Israel won like so much land, they essentially Israeli settlers started going into the West Bank, and there's this like weird law that has to be renewed every 5 years in order to grant them the same rights and everything as regular Israelis living outside the West Bank. So the West Bank is supposed to be for the Palestinians, but the settlers that live there have the same rights as long as this thing is renewed every 5 years. And that's a complete oversimplification, but that gives you the idea. So it says here, among other things, the regulation, which comes up for renewal every 5 years, gives Israeli settlers the same rights as citizens in Israel, and is an article of faith for right-wing members of the coalition, including Prime Minister Bennett. But 2 members of the coalition failed to support the bill, meaning it failed to pass. If Parliament dissolves before July 1st, the regulation will remain in place until a new government is formed. So if you're a settler, then you're probably like, okay, I don't like this. But maybe you're not too worried because you know something will work out. But I guess if it doesn't pass at all after the new government is formed, then I guess they're kind of screwed. They're going to be losing some benefits. All right, that's it for that one. Now we're here with the New York Times. Okay, so here it is again, Naftali Bennett right here, and then Yair Lapid. Okay, Jerusalem. Israel's governing... Oh, by the way, it was Bob D. that pointed this out to me. He sent me an email. I wasn't aware that this was happening until I saw my email. So thank you, Bob. Israel's governing coalition will dissolve parliament before the end of the month, bringing down the government and sending the country into a 5th election in 3 years, the Prime Minister said on Monday. The decision plunged Israel back into paralysis and threw a political lifeline to Benjamin Netanyahu, the right-wing Prime Minister who left office just 1 year ago upon the formation of the current government. Now, it's interesting that it's talking about paralysis because from what I understand, it was hard for anything really to happen within this government. They didn't really do like a whole lot. I thought I read that a few times, but I guess like even more paralysis. Okay, so it says Mr. Netanyahu is currently standing trial on corruption charges, but has refused to leave politics, and his Likud party is leading in the polls. Once Parliament formally votes to dissolve itself, it will bring down the curtain on one of the most ambitious political projects in Israeli history, an unwieldy 8-party coalition that united political opponents from the right, left, and center, and included the first independent Arab party to join an Israeli government coalition. But that ideological diversity was also its undoing. I guess that's kind of ironic. Differences between the coalition's 2 ideological wings, compounded by unrelenting pressure from Mr. Netanyahu's right-wing alliance, led 2 right-wing lawmakers to defect, removing the coalition's majority in parliament. When several left-wing and Arab lawmakers also rebelled on key votes, the coalition found it impossible to govern. The final straw was the government's inability last week to muster enough votes to extend a 2-tier legal system in the West Bank. That's the thing that we were talking about, the thing that has to be renewed every 5 years. And this is how they're, framing it, a 2-tier legal system in the West Bank, which has differentiated between Israeli settlers and Palestinians since Israel occupied the territory in 1967. Several Arab members of the coalition declined to vote for the system, which must be extended every 5 years. That prevented the bill's passage and prompted Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, a former settler leader, to collapse the government and thereby delay a final vote until after another election. Let's see, I don't think I had anything else in this one. Okay, Bennett, Lapid agree on dissolving Knesset. Israel heads for fifth election in 3 years. Now, I highlighted this because in this article, this is Haaretz, it says 3.5 years. So, paving the way for Israel's fifth election in 3.5 years. Now, as you know, I'm not really one that's big on the 3.5 year thing when it comes to reading Revelation, Daniel, because I look at it from the symbolic point of view rather than the literal, 1,260 days, 1,290 days, 1,335 days, 42 months, times and a half, blah, blah, blah. I don't really go into that. I have separate playlists for the book of Revelation, book of Daniel, 7-year tribulation that explain why. However, if I'm wrong, this is just an interesting thing to point out, 3.5 years. Anyway, if the vote passes, Yesh Atid leader, Yair Lapid, will become the caretaker prime minister until the elections are held on October 25th. October 25th. Let's take a look at our Jewish calendar. Okay. October 25th, excuse me, that's going to come just a week after Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. It'll also be in the new Jewish year. Okay, it'll be the new Jewish year. The Jewish year starts on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so right now we're in the year 5782 on the Hebrew calendar, and on September 26th of this year, it's going to change to 5783. Even though the month of Tishri is the 7th month on the Hebrew calendar, that's when they change the date of the year. Okay, from 82 to 83. So I'm pointing this out just because I don't know. It's just kind of interesting that this is happening. Okay, because right now we're in a sabbatical year. Every 7 years is a Shemitah, or a sabbatical year. Or if you think of the years as days of the week, then basically every Shemitah, every 7th year is the Sunday, or the Sabbath year, the sabbatical year. You get it? So I don't know at all if the Shemitah cycle plays into the Second Coming. We do know that things have happened in this dispensation that have to do with the Jewish feast days, specifically Joseph Smith receiving the gold plates on Rosh Hashanah, and also Elijah coming to the Kirtland Temple on first fruits. Okay, so these feast days still seem to have significance even in this dispensation, and for all I know, maybe the Shemitahs do too. So after this Shemitah year is up, that's when they're going to have these elections. And does that equate to something significant happening, the next leader? I don't know. I don't know. We're just going to have to wait and see. This is history being made, but I don't know. I should have looked this up because, okay. Naftali Bennett. I just want to see, excuse me, how long he's been prime minister. Okay, let's go to the Wikipedia. He assumed office June of 2021. So basically, just a few months before the Shemitah year ended, and then this government is going to end after the Shemitah is done. So like the majority of his time was during the Shemitah. Okay. Now, like I said, since he's been prime minister, it doesn't seem like a whole lot has happened. I don't know if somehow, metaphorically speaking, that lines up with the Shemitah. It's time of rest. In the state of Israel, there's not to be any agricultural work done. Okay, it's a Sabbath year. So with his ministry kind of being quiet itself, I wonder if that kind of matches up. Maybe not, but who knows. So okay, so it's interesting. It's interesting. Was there anything else here? As Prime Minister, Lapid will host U.S. President Joe Biden next month, who is still expected to visit Israel next month as planned, according to the U.S. Embassy spokesperson in Israel. In the corridors of Israel's parliament, the predominant feeling among members of the coalition was bewilderment. Many lawmakers were not informed in advance of the decision made after a meeting between Bennett and Lapid, and were left to hear it from the media. That is truly, that's bizarre. I would be, if it was me, I'd probably be a little bit upset. Justice Minister Gideon Saar also responded to the announcement, quote, "As I've warned, the irresponsibility of certain coalition lawmakers has brought about the inevitable. The goal in the coming election is clear: preventing Netanyahu's return to power and enslaving the state to his interests." So it's kind of weird, because if he's, being investigated for corruption, you'd think that maybe there'd be some law that would make it so that that disqualifies him, or, I mean, I don't know. Or maybe that, that would tarnish his reputation with the Israeli people. But I don't know. I guess not. Meanwhile, the head of the opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu, released a jubilant video on social media hailing the quote-unquote great news and pledged to establish a national government, quote, "a national government that would bring back national pride." Religious Zionism chairman Bezalel Smotrich said, quote, "The nation of Israel lives. No more division and no more incitement. Soon, with God's help, Jewish unity, Zionism, and true patriotism will lead Israel." So, I guess the takeaway is right now there's even more instability in Israel. We were talking about how things were kind of getting unstable around the time of Passover. Well, now it's like come to a head, and who knows what happens next? Who's going to be the next prime minister? Now, another thing that I've brought up on the channel that I guess I'm not really too concerned about it, but it's something that could happen. We have to look at this from the religious point of view, specifically the Jewish religious point of view. You and me, we've accepted that Christ is the Savior, that He is the Messiah. They have not. They're expecting Messiah to come. And they have a different idea of what Messiah is. Right? And I have wondered about this. Remember when we looked at this article? This was just 2 years ago. Israel's top rabbi, quote, "I'm currently in discussions with the Messiah himself." So this is, excuse me, if I remember right, it was him right here, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. Okay, he passed away. He had a huge funeral. It was a big deal. It was a really big deal when he passed away. So, if I remember right, this is the one who claims to have been in talks with Messiah. In fact, let me see if I can nail that down. Let's see. Kanievsky. Yeah, look at that. Rabbi Kanievsky. Messiah is already here speaking with me. Rabbi Zischultz then explains several recent statements made by Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, one of the most prominent rabbis of this generation concerning the Messiah. Quote, Rabbi Kanievsky is so holy that he has Ruach HaKadosh, Holy Spirit prophecy. Rabbi Zisholtz said, quote, at first, 5 years ago, Rabbi Kanievsky said the Messiah is at the door. Then a bit later, he said that Messiah already passed the threshold of the door. Not so long ago, he said the Messiah is already here. He most recently told Rabbi Chulak, by the way, Chulak, that's the planet that Tilk is from in Stargate SG-1, if you ever watched that series. But anyway, he most recently told Rabbi Chulak that Messiah is already here with both feet speaking with me. These are various revelations of Mashiach, each one a greater revelation than the previous one. Every word uttered by Rabbi Kanievsky is weighed. It doesn't say extraneous words. I no longer travel outside of Israel. The Messiah is so close that I am afraid that I might miss his arrival, Rabbi Kanievsky said. Rabbi Kanievsky said the Messiah is here in Israel, but he did not give a precise time when he will be revealed. Now this right here, this is the key. He says he is here, but he does not have all the power he needs to act as Messiah. All of the signs given in the Talmud, in Jewish tradition, have already appeared. So this is kind of shocking. Not to you and me, because we would not accept this person as Messiah. But it's shocking because this indicates that there is a person. There's a person out there that has been recognized, at the very least, by Rabbi Kanievsky as Messiah. And who's to say that before he died, he didn't tell other rabbis who it was? So what does that have to do with what's going on in Israel right now and this unsteady government, this instability, what's going on, changing of the guard? Well, I've wondered before, what happens if that guy who's been recognized as Messiah, at least by Rabbi Kanievsky, what if he decides to make his appearance? And what if all the rabbis confirm? They confirm to the rest of the nation and Jews all across the world that, hey, this is Moshiach. What if that happens? Do you think there's going to be another government after these guys? I don't know what would happen, but I don't think so. Things would get very biblical very fast. Can you imagine how the Arab world would react to that? Because here's what's supposed to happen. Okay, let's look at what are the, in Judaism, excuse me, what are the qualifications, or how do you know that someone is Messiah? Oh, and by the way, here's a separate article. The Sanhedrin begins to prepare oil to anoint King Messiah / Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol is high priest. So King Messiah / high priest. So they're preparing the oil to anoint Messiah. Okay, I pulled up a few different sources here. They pretty much all agree. This is Aish.com or Aish.com. Who is the Messiah? It says, while this general description provides some of the details of the requirements, the Rambam codifies that there are, in fact, 2 stages to belief that a particular individual is the Moshiach. 1, presumption that an individual is Mashiach, and 2, complete confirmation thereof. Quote, and if a king from the house of David shall arise, learned in Torah, and engaged in mitzvos, like his forefather David, according to both the written Torah and the oral Torah, and further, he 1, compels all of Israel to walk in the ways of the Torah. 2, fights wars of God to restore Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel and implement Torah law, then such a person is presumed, although not confirmed, to be the Moshiach. If he does this and is successful, and he, 1, defeats all the nations that surround him, 2, rebuilds the base HaMikdash in its correct place, and 3, gathers in the diaspora of Israel, then he certainly, then he is certainly Mashiach. And I should have done this before. I wasn't thinking. I think base HaMikdash. I think that's the temple. I think that's like, it means the mountain or his mountain or something like that, if you were to translate it. Maybe not. Could be wrong. But anyway, as you can see, it pulls up the temple. Okay, it pulls up the temple. So he is supposed to rebuild the temple in its correct place. Okay, so again, I ask you, what happens if suddenly Israel is in just like an uproar? There's a guy here that is Mashiach. He's presumed to be Mashiach, and everyone's talking about it. And so he now has maybe the power to go forward with plans to build the temple, right? Because I'm assuming, I mean, if I was an Israeli and all the rabbis are like, that's him right there, I would do whatever he said if I was Jewish. Who wouldn't do what the Messiah says to do? Right? He would do whatever needed to be done, whatever he asks you to do. So if that is, let's go ahead and build the temple. Okay, so that's where maybe some problems might come in. That maybe that's how World War III starts. Okay, and then he gathers in the diaspora, or the Jews from all across the world, right? This guy right here, from what I can tell, I did a video about him. I was confused because they made like a billboard with his face on it, claiming that he was Mashiach. And I think he thought, or others were presuming, that he was Mashiach. But then there was like another article saying that it wasn't him. So I don't know exactly what happened, but so the presumed Mashiach, a king will arise from the house of David, who is learned in Torah and occupied in the observance of commandments as David his ancestor. He will compel all of Israel to walk in the way of the Torah and reinforce the breaches in its observance. And he will fight the wars of God. And then here's the definite Mashiach. 5, is victorious over the nations around him, and he builds the temple in his place, and he gathers the dispersed of Israel. Okay, this is Moshiach.ru for Russia. This is JewsForJudaism.org. First of all, he must be Jewish. He must be a member of the tribe of Judah. He must be a direct male descendant of King David and King Solomon. He must gather the Jewish people from exile and return them to Israel. He must rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. He will rule at a time of worldwide peace. Now, this would be once the Messianic era had started. The redemption is what they call it. He will rule at a time when the Jewish people will observe God's commandments. He will rule at a time when all people will come to acknowledge and serve one God. Okay. I think there were a few things here. Maybe, oh yeah, okay. When will Mashiach come? Okay, so now imagine this. This is from Chabad.org. And these are like Orthodox Jews. They know Judaism. I always come to this website if I want to know anything about Judaism. It says, however, okay, so when will Mashiach come? The Talmud states that there is a predestined time when Mashiach will come. If we are meritorious, he may come even before the predestined time. This quote-unquote end of time remains a mystery, yet the Talmud states that it will be before the Hebrew year 6,000. The Hebrew year at the date of this publication is 5772. And what we were just looking at, going back to the calendar, because I already forgot, is we are in 5782. 5782. Okay. All right, let's go back to Chabad. All right. And by the way, there has been just fever pitch when it comes to Messiah, and they're taking all these different signs and things happening to mean that Messiah is almost here. And I've said that I think that the Lord is actually preparing them for the second coming when Christ comes to them in a glorious way, more in line with what they're expecting, defeating their enemies via battle or conquering their enemies that are fighting against them. So this is also why this is important, because I do think that the Lord is preparing them for when Christ comes for the second coming. Okay, if this individual actually succeeds in rebuilding the temple and gathering in the exiles, then he is Mashiach, right? Those are the two of the confirmation things that is Mashiach. What exactly will happen when Mashiach comes? Maimonides states in his Mishneh Torah, a compendium of the entire halachic tradition, that Mashiach will first rebuild the temple and then gather in the exiles. Jerusalem and the temple will be the focus of divine worship, and, quote, from Zion shall go forth Torah and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Now, we have a different interpretation of that because we in our church, we recognize that there's going to be a new Jerusalem and then the original Jerusalem. In this case, the Zion being the American New Jerusalem. Anyway, the Sanhedrin, the supreme Jewish law court of 71 sages, will be reestablished and will decide on all matters of law. So you see this right here. This is another thing. If a Messiah, or if Mashiach, someone recognized as Mashiach, comes on the scene, it doesn't seem like the old government would be coming back. Based on what I'm seeing here, Mashiach is basically king, as you would expect, and then the Sanhedrin would decide all matters of law, right? If I'm understanding this right. At this time, all Jews will return to full Torah observance and practice. It should be noted that in this present age of great assimilation and emancipation, an unprecedented return of Jews to true Torah values has taken place. This Baal Teshuvah phenomenon is on the increase and paves the way for a full return in the Messianic era. All right. I'm not going to go over this one, but here's another one. So, interesting things. I think that we have to watch it because any number of things could happen. Whether it be a guy who believes that he's Mashiach coming on the scene, or whether something else happens. What if we get some new prime minister that just comes in from out of left field and he does really historic things? What if it's somebody that's really determined to build the third temple? Just anything could happen. But it would behoove us to watch this because we're living in a very turbulent time right now in the world. Things just have not been the same and probably will never be the same as they were before 2020. Crazy things are happening. Remember, I guess one last thing I should point out. We've got the list of prime ministers here. The first one, interestingly, his name was David, and I think that probably was meant to be, right? As of right now, Naftali Bennett is the 13th prime minister, which I suppose after this, for the short little time that he's the acting prime minister, maybe they'll technically count Yair Lapid as the 14th. These are interesting numbers because Benjamin Netanyahu, he was the 12th, right? So if you're looking at like completion, okay, there's different numbers that represent completion. 7 is one of those, right? Perfection and completion because of the creation of the earth and the world. You also have the number 10, which also represents, in like more mathematical sense, completion and perfection. But you look at this number, 12 and 13. Well, I mean, 12 represents the priesthood. It represents the 12 tribes of Israel. 13 kind of does too, because if you were to look at land Israel, and you also include the Levites as a separate group, you would have 13 groups, right? If everyone was to stand by a flag, if you were to divide everybody up by land, you'd have the 12 tribes of Israel, and then you could plant a 13th flag and say, okay, now all the Levites, you come over here because we're going to have you as a separate. You'd have 13. So it's interesting numbers because of that. It may not mean anything, or it might. We'll just have to see. 14 is 7 plus 7. So just like how we've been looking at, the number 17, which you have the two numbers of perfection and completion, 7 and 10 added together, 17. So maybe 14 is another thing like that. I don't know. I just want to call these things to everybody's attention. May not mean anything, but let's just watch and we'll see what happens. That's all we can do. Alright, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video. If you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share this, and I'll talk to you guys later.